I think one of the interesting things that I saw in that time was the people who were in it, it was all they had. It was like, you have
Yeah.
to be all in.
Yeah.
I had the blessing of having a college degree from a great university and a wonderful foundation of network here in Los Angeles, and it's just in general to be able to really explore what I wanted to do beyond sports. But the reality is, I mean, I could sit here and be like, good job, we thought of something that became super popular 8 years later because of COVID. But that was, I think that it's more, okay, yeah, it's great that we were a little bit ahead of the curve, but how do you monetize that? Now, I will say my shift into venture definitely allows me to do that a little bit more effectively,
Mm-hmm.
because I take bets on a handful of these,
Mm-hmm.
I guess, perspectives of where I think the world is going. Um, and candidly, I think that I've actually done okay a couple times in that department, because my first fund, I'm fast forwarding, but
Yeah.
so from Tiki and the video streaming, I did take a step back and I joined very early. I joined the Series A of Eat Club
Mm-hmm.
to run expansion for that business.
Mm-hmm.
That was a totally different world, which was corporate catering using technology to allow people to order their food individually, and yeah, totally different world. And it was great, and I learned a lot. I moved to San Francisco for a year for it, um, and it was very, very interesting. From there, I then moved into another company in the on-demand marketplace
Mm-hmm.
world, which was called Zeal.
Mm-hmm.
Is called Zeal Thursday, and it was a massage on-demand company. So like Uber for massages, become a bit more of a health and wellness platform now.
So just to be devil's advocate for a moment, don't the other brokerage businesses who have or operating businesses who have these technology arms claim to do the same thing?
I think you used a great word. You said claim to do the
Yeah.
same thing.
Okay. Well, I
Um,
haven't done any due
yeah,
diligence on this subject.
no, totally. I think I actually don't know if they do claim to do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, some of the other platforms have made venture investments, and they have the capability of doing that. But as far as I know, none of them have committed to building out a platform as dedicated as ours is.
Right.
And
And
and it's not even a slight to them, by the way. It's just I just don't think anyone's really taken that approach.
right. And is it competitive to when you have founders come to you with an idea? Is it competitive to be? I'm assuming you want to be the lead or to be a primary investor in their company, or is it often just like an obvious fit?
No, we have to compete like the rest of other venture funds.
Mm-hmm.
We have to present our value. Often, luckily at this point, we have a pretty significant track record, and I'm happy to introduce any of our founders that we've invested into prospective founders and let them make their own decisions. But like any other competitive venture round, we come in and we say we think we're the best partner for you. We'd like to be your lead investor. And we're also, we do our best to not be super sharp elbowed. We've co-led
Mm-hmm.
many rounds with some of those partners that I mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, People who we have invested in multiple companies
Sure.
with
Sure.
us. And so it ends up actually working out really nicely because we can work closely with others to find the best solutions for those portfolio companies.
Where's the capital today in the VC prop tech world? Clearly, obviously, we hear so much about private companies that can't find capital to go the next round, and there's no
Yeah.
liquidity in the market. So, have you been tempted to move up the chain to do some further stage companies where you have capital and you can even do a down round or something like that? Or how is
Yeah.
that evolving?
Well, we're currently investing out of our fifth vehicle, which is a $100 million vehicle that we, uh, like any other fund, we have to think about the portfolio construction and how we're investing and how we're going to get the returns required in order for it to be successful. That's why we believe that Series A is a great place to be, because we can get ownership in at least relatively established businesses at the early stage. And simultaneously have enough influence from a strategic perspective that we feel like we can help them. The minute you start going a little bit later, which we've dabbled in the past, and I don't think we've had as much success doing, it just requires a very large amount of capital,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to it's just, I mean, look, it's honestly, it's a slightly different asset class, and we just aren't. That's not what we think we can do best.
Got it.
Today.
Okay, fair enough.
For the future, we might. I mean, look, there's a lot of things that we have a lot of goals for the future of what we'd like JLL Spark to look like, but today that's not what we're built to do.
Have you been able to have your companies that you've seeded that have market acceptance? Have they been able to get the next rounds done in this market?
Look, going all the way back to my original point about sometimes we've lost sight of building good businesses.
Mm-hmm.
If you build a good business, people want to invest.
Okay.
And so, we've had some success stories. We've had a lot of companies that have really done an amazing job of not only building companies that are solving pain points, but are defensible and are truly solving problems in a meaningful way. And when you do those things, people will pay for it, right? It's all about ROI.
Right.
Ultimately, it's are you solving a problem that's actually going to immediately help me, or at least in the short term, help me make more money? And especially in real estate, they care about that.
Yeah, I totally understand what you're saying. I think we talk about similar things when we're thinking about our clients. I've heard you say to that you ask founders, what is your unfair advantage? Can you give an example of this and when it worked well?
Yeah. Well, I mean, especially in the early days, when you're speaking to founders, I think where I've excelled personally as an investor is identifying very early founders and giving them a chance to be successful. What we do at JLL is a little bit later. What I was doing at Luma was taking bets on ideas very often, and you have to ask founders, and this definitely applies to Series A as well. It's just more that I think it's more of an important factor in my decision making at an earlier stage. But when you're sitting down in front of a founder, sometimes you just have to ask the question of like, why are you? Why are you? Why your team? What is different about your business and you personally that's actually going to give you a chance of success in this market? Because there's probably 5, 10, 15 other really smart people trying to build some version of this.
Mm-hmm.
What makes you different? It can come in a variety of ways.
Can you give us an example of something that worked well?
I mean, look, I think the obvious one is when, especially if it's a bit of a complicated industry, if someone's like, I've worked for 20 years in this industry doing this, a variety of different roles, I understand it better than anyone else. And I've seen the pain points firsthand. There's a great example of just like the obvious unfair advantage. But sometimes it's like, I have direct access to the 2 largest clients or the potential clients in the world that have already agreed to sign up for an LOI. Okay. That's just the reality of things. Sometimes it's just you have someone who has access to be able to, springboard themselves into a different sort of position in the market.
One of the things you mentioned is that Spark is working all over the world, in EMEA and Europe. One of the things that I've heard is the U.S. is really the country where we nurture founders. And, if you try something and you fail, that's good. Now you have experience and you should try again. Whereas in Europe, if you try something and fail, close the book.
Yeah.
You cannot try again. How do you see sort of how do you see cultural expectations and adaptations for startups?
It's a very interesting and important point especially when we're investing in companies across different regions. You're spot on. I know France is one of those where if you fail, you get slapped on the wrist pretty heavily. In fact, you can't start another company in France if you do fail, at least for a while. I think unfortunately I want to be careful bucketing. So Europe, for instance, let's just take Europe as a continent. There are very different sub communities, right? Each country has a very different approach, not very, but a slightly different approach to technology and startups. You'll find that there's a lot of innovation in London, and in the UK there's a lot more acceptance because I think there's a bit more of a crossover from the US. In Germany, same. There's a lot of stuff that's happening over there that's really interesting. But again, in France, it's a little bit, it just doesn't have the same level of that startup culture and some of these other regions that are more conservative. And so, you know, we haven't seen as many success stories out of for instance, you have Israel, which is kind of built their whole technology MO around being a startup hub. Or you go to APAC, and you know it's a very, very different world there as well, right? You go, you know, China's a completely different market that has a litany of challenges, but obviously they are building a ton of technology over there, and so we have to navigate all of those. You know, frankly, I think that there's a reason that the vast majority of the investments that we've made are in the U.S.